you want to respond, Farooq Dodi, that this is Kamal Sibal almost hinting that this is the Anglo-Saxon world, the Western world in a way, looking at India through their lens and drawing this link between the Modi documentary and the raids on the BBC. India shouldn't be too worried. It will not affect India's global image. Even the British government is silent.
Well, the British government has nothing to do with criticizing the Modi government as such. It makes deals with them and so on. But in any democracy, in any liberal, proper democracy, one has to separate the government from the country. Why? Because the government is not permanent in a democracy. It's by definition something that can change in short periods of time. There are other places which are not democracies, like China and Russia. And they sit on their media, they stop any negative image coming through to their populations. But in India, which professes to be a democracy, which has a democratic constitution, it is wrong for the government to step on freedom of speech, to stop people writing about or criticizing the government. And what was being said is quite wrong. The BBC always criticizes its own government. There's no problem about them saying that Liz Truss, the ex-Prime Minister, was wrong in what she was doing. I saw 10 programs which said that. There was no problem with the BBC saying that Boris Johnson had run Partygate and gone against his own laws and regulations. There's always criticism of government policy on the BBC. That's what the BBC is for. Now, obviously, the viewing public of the West might begin to think that the Modi government is censorious. Why? Because it is. It does ban this and stop that. And then, instead of defending themselves fact by fact against the documentaries that were shown on the BBC, I don't know, I will not make a judgment about the truth or the lies of them, but if the Modi government and India are against what the documentaries were saying, they should have taken the documentaries apart and said, this is wrong, this is factually wrong, because I read some pieces in the Indian press which said that the Supreme Court has
are you therefore saying that this will in any way affect the global image of the Modi government? Do you really believe that the BBC has that kind of clout today?
Yes, I do. I believe that it will affect the image, but that will not affect the way that the Indian public votes. You know, if the Indian public votes for the BJP, well, the BJP win the election and they become the government. That's the fact of democracy. That's the fact of the constitution.
But you know, in a way, therefore, KC Singh, what we are seeing is, here's Kamal Sibal saying this is a bit of an Anglo-Saxon conspiracy. The rest of the world couldn't care. Farooq Dodi saying the BBC still has that kind of clout. It is being seen as an assault on the freedom of the press. How do you see it? Do you really believe that the Modi government should be worried about how the international media opinion sees raids being or surveys taking place on the BBC? Or should we just brazen it out and say, look, we will let our income tax authorities carry out their investigation. We're not worried whether it's the BBC, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or anyone for that matter?
Rajiv, we can take the cynical stand and agree with Mr. Sibal and say who gives a damn what the world is saying. But at the same time, we do quote the world. We need global investment. And we must make a distinction between what those governments will do. They will approach cynically, and they were more excited yesterday about the planes that we ordered from Airbus and Boeing,
that's right,
including the president of US giving a very laudatory statement, rather than freedom of expression or documentary not being shown in India. But that is how it has always been.
Yes.
But there is a democratic recession in the world, and this is being debated. For instance, the latest index of economists, we can say it's another Anglo-Saxon publication, puts both US and India in the category of flawed democracies. Full democracies are only a few in Europe, not all of them. Because even within the European Union, you have a fascist right-wing prime minister, though she's behaving herself in Italy. So democracy can also throw up governments which do not always protect democratic freedoms. Electoral democracy is one thing, but liberal democracy is another thing. Now, as far as Indian image is concerned, I totally agree with Mr. Dondi that it's an image in continuum. What makes India attractive to countries like US or countries in the West is both her economy, both her geopolitical importance, but on a more lasting basis, being a democracy as compared to China.
But it's
And
never
that's what
affected the rise
Eisenhower
of China.
in the
But
beginning.
Mr. Casey saying the fact that China is seen as a country where there are these curbs on the free press has never affected the rise of China. You just mentioned most of these leaders yesterday were speaking about the Airbus, the Boeing deal. They're not worried about a raid on BBC.
Absolutely correct. And that is why all through the 80s and 90s, China was rising because US was focused elsewhere. All through the 80s, the Americans ignored the nuclear bomb and the existence between China, a cooperation between China and the Pakistanis until the Soviets had left Afghanistan. So there is cynicism and in geopolitics. By the same time, remember, Biden came into government promising that he's going to focus on democracy. Unfortunately, he's been derailed by COVID and derailed by the Ukraine war. He had a summit in December of 21. The next democracy summit is due in a month's time. It's in March 2023. How do we look there when we go on a global forum and we are invited as a democracy and then this news seeps through? So it doesn't affect our relations immediately, but does affect the thinking of the congressman, thinking of the elite in that country. We can be cynical and say we don't give a damn. They'll come to India because they need us. But at the same time, what kind of an India do we want to make? And that is why opposition is so agitated in India. The liberal democracies may not be agitated because they have economic interests. They are interested in business in India. They are interested in geopolitical importance of India. But to continue India on an upward climb and retain the image we've had since 47, except for the period of emergency, I think it's important that we safeguard that image. We can be cynical.